This is a short presentation on the zones of regulation and how they can start to become part of everyday classroom life. I am not here to add another thing to your workload, and this is not about changing everything that you already do. This is about using the small moments that already exist in the day to help children recognise and manage what they are feeling. When we think about a normal school day, it has its rhythm. There are calm and focused moments, busy moments, and times that catch everyone off guard. Across all of that, there is constant behaviour happening. Sometimes it is easy to manage and other times it can feel challenging, but none of it is random. Every bit of behaviour you see is communication. It is a child showing you how they are coping in that moment. When we start to look at behaviour in that way, it changes how we respond. It stops being about trying to control what we see and becomes about understanding what the child needs. This is what the zones of regulation helps with. They give children and staff a shared way to talk about emotions. They help everyone recognise what is going on, name it, and find ways to manage it more effectively. Before introducing the framework itself, I want to talk about 3 key ideas that sit at the centre of this approach. The first is that all behaviour communicates something. Everything a child does in the classroom, whether it is calling out, refusing work, joking around, or withdrawing, is giving us information. It shows us how that child is coping with what is happening around them. The second is that we need to understand behaviour before we respond to it. When we pause and think about what might be driving a behaviour, we are far more likely to respond in a way that actually helps. If we skip that step, we risk addressing the surface and missing the real message underneath. The third is the importance of creating a shared emotional language. When everyone in a school uses the same kind of language to talk about emotions, it normalizes the conversation. Children begin to see that feelings are something we can recognize, talk about, and manage together. Those 3 ideas are the foundation for everything that follows in this presentation. They shape how the zones of regulation work in practice and why they are effective. Now, let's look at what the zones of regulation actually are. The framework uses 4 colours. Each one represents a different emotional or energy state. Blue is when our energy feels low. That might be when a child is tired, sad, or just not feeling great. Green is when we are calm and focused. This is the state where children are most ready to learn. Yellow is when energy starts to rise. This can also be linked to excitement, frustration, or worry. And red is when emotions feel really strong, such as anger, panic, or total overwhelm. It is important to remember that every one of these zones is completely normal. Nobody stays in green all day, not children and not adults. We all move between these zones depending on what is happening around us and how we are feeling. The goal is not to keep children calm all the time. The goal is to help them notice when they are starting to shift and to build the skills to bring themselves back when they need to. That awareness is the foundation of self-regulation. Now, this is where the zones become powerful. They help children recognise and talk about what is going on inside before it becomes behaviour on the outside. When that awareness develops, behaviour starts to make sense and the classroom becomes a space where emotions can be understood instead of just managed. So let's think about why emotional language actually matters. Children are not born knowing how to regulate their emotions. It is something that has to be taught, modelled, and practiced over time. When we give emotions names, we help children make sense of what they are feeling. It gives them something to hold on to and something that they can talk about rather than act out. If a child can say, "I think I'm in yellow because my heart feels fast," that is a really important step. It means that they have started noticing what is happening inside and that they have paused long enough to reflect, and that is where regulation begins. When we use emotional language throughout the day, it starts to become natural. It does not need to be a big conversation every time. It can be a small check-in, such as asking, "What zone are you in right now?" or saying, "You look like you might be in yellow. What could help you get back to green?" Those little moments build self-awareness. The more we use this language, the more familiar it becomes. Over time, children begin to use it themselves. They start naming their feelings and linking them to strategies that help. That is how emotional awareness turns into emotional regulation. I want us to talk about behaviour for a moment. In schools, we often talk about managing behaviour, and that does make sense because sometimes things happen quickly and we need to respond. But managing behaviour is not the same as teaching it. Managing focuses on the surface, the thing we see. Teaching looks at what is underneath and gives the child skills they can use next time. When I look at behaviour, I always ask myself, what is this behaviour trying to tell me? Because every behaviour has a reason. Maybe a child is avoiding a task because it feels too hard. Maybe they are shouting out because they want attention. Or maybe they are sitting quietly because they are overwhelmed and do not know what to do. When we use the zones of regulation, it helps us to get to that why. It helps us see beyond what is happening on the surface. For example, instead of saying, stop shouting, we might instead say, it looks like you might be in red. What can help you right now? That small shift in language shows the child that we are interested in understanding them, not just controlling them. When we start teaching behaviour rather than managing it, we give children tools that they can use on their own, and that is where real progress starts to happen. Language is one of the most powerful tools we have when it comes to supporting children's emotions and behaviour. The words we use can either calm a situation or make it worse. When we tell a child to calm down, it does not teach them how to do that. It just tells them what we want. But if we say, it sounds like you might be in yellow, what could help you feel green again? That gives them a process to follow. It makes regulation something that they can actually do rather than something they are being told to do. When adults across the school use the same kind of language consistently, it creates predictability, and predictability builds trust. Children start to know what to expect, and they begin to mirror that language themselves. You start hearing things like, I am in yellow, I need a break, or I'm starting to feel red, can I have some space? That is what consistency creates. The way we talk to children becomes the way they talk to themselves. Our language, our tone, and body language sets the model for how they will eventually manage their own emotions. Alright, so let's think about the classroom environment for a second, because this is one of those things that's easy to overlook, but it has a massive impact on how regulated children feel. Everything in that space is giving them a message. The lighting, the noise level, the way transitions happen, even how predictable the day feels. All of that tells them something about whether they're safe and in control or whether things feel uncertain. When a classroom runs predictably, it gives children space to focus on learning instead of constantly trying to figure out what's coming next. And the physical space can do a lot of the work for us. Having a zones chart up on the wall, a calm area that's genuinely calm, or a small check-in board by the door, all of those things help children reflect before we even have to step in. Sometimes it's just about building in small pauses, like just before a new lesson, just saying something like, what zone are we in right now? Or what can help us stay in green for this next bit? It only takes a few seconds, but helps children become aware of what's going on for them. The environment's always teaching, even when we aren't. If it feels calm, structured, and predictable, children start to pick that up, and that in itself becomes a model for regulation. The next part I want to focus on is what happens in the moment when emotions start to rise and things begin to feel tense. And this is where the way we respond really matters. How we handle these situations directly affects what happens next. In those moments, our behaviour becomes the model for how children learn to manage their emotions in the future. If we respond with high energy or frustration, the situation is more likely to escalate. However, when we stay calm, slow things down, and keep our tone steady, we show children what regulation should look like. Often, our tone and body language communicate safety more effectively than any words that we use. It helps to describe what you notice rather than give instructions. For example, saying, your voice sounds louder and your body looks tense, helps children recognize their emotional state without feeling criticized. That short pause for reflection often prevents escalation. The goal in these moments is not to stop the emotion, but to manage it safely. Children learn that strong feelings are normal and that they can recover from them with the right support. Consistent, calm responses build trust and help children feel secure enough to begin regulating themselves. Now, once those moments of regulation start to appear, even in small ways, that is where reinforcement becomes really important. Noticing and acknowledging progress, no matter how small, helps children develop confidence in their ability to manage their own emotions. So now that we have looked at how to respond in the moment, let's talk about what happens after. This is where reinforcement becomes so important. Reinforcement simply means recognizing and strengthening the behaviour we want to see more of. When a child begins to use a strategy or shows even a small step towards regulation, that moment needs to be acknowledged. It is not about praise for the sake of it, but about drawing attention to what worked. For example, if a child notices they are in yellow and decides to take a short break before things get harder, you might say something like, "You noticed how you were feeling and you chose to take a break. That was a really good choice." Statements like that are powerful because they focus on the process, not just the outcome. The more those moments are noticed, the more likely children are to repeat them. It strengthens their awareness that they have some control over how they respond to emotions. Over time, that builds independence and confidence in managing themselves. Reinforcement should always be specific and immediate so that children can make a clear link between what they did and why it helped. These small acknowledgements, repeated consistently, help regulation become a habit rather than something that depends on adult guidance. As those skills begin to grow, some children will still need more structure and support to maintain regulation, which brings us to the next point. Some children will find regulation much harder than others, even with clear routines and consistent adult responses. This can be because of factors such as neurodevelopmental conditions like autism, ADHD, or experiences of trauma. These children often experience emotions more intensely or move between zones more quickly. For them, the strategies we have already talked about still apply, but they need to be more structured and more intentional. Visual supports are really helpful here. Things like individual emotion cards, a personal check-in chart, or a visual timetable can all reduce uncertainty and help children know what to expect. Short, clear instructions work best when a child is overwhelmed. Too much language can increase stress. Keeping it simple and calm allows them to process what is being said. Predictable routines are also key. When children know what is coming next, they feel safer and are better able to stay regulated. Progress for these children might look different. It might be a pause before reacting or using a visual cue rather than shouting. It might be taking a breath or asking for space. Each of those small moments is a sign of growth and should be recognized. Every child's starting point is different. What matters is consistency, patience, and reinforcement. Over time, even the smallest steps forward can lead to meaningful and lasting change in how a child understands and manages their emotions. Let's look next at how our own behaviour as adults can support that process through consistent modelling. I think one of the most powerful things that we can do to teach regulation is to model it ourselves. Children learn so much from what we do than from what we tell them to do. When they see adults handling emotions calmly, it gives them a clear example of what regulation actually looks like in real life. And that can be as simple as saying, "I'm starting to feel a bit stressed, so I'm going to take a breath before we carry on." It sounds small, but it's huge in terms of what it teaches. It shows honesty and self-awareness, and it lets children see that emotions aren't bad or wrong. They're just part of being human, and there are ways to manage them safely. When we model regulation, we normalize it. We make it something that happens every day, not just when something goes wrong. And that's really important because it helps children see that adults experience the same emotions that they do, but that there are ways to work through them. Our tone, our pace, and even how we respond when things don't go to plan, all of that sets the tone for the classroom. If we can stay calm and grounded under pressure, we're showing children what to do when things get difficult. It's not about being perfect, it's about being real and consistent. When adults across the school model regulation in the same calm, honest way, it starts to shape the culture. Children begin to see that feelings can be talked about openly, and they start to build confidence in managing their own. And that brings us into the next slide, which looks at how we can take all of this and build a wider culture of regulation across the school. So the last thing I want to look at is how this all comes together to create a wider culture of regulation across the school. because it's one thing to use the zones within individual classrooms, but the real impact happens when it becomes part of the whole school language. When adults across the school use the same approach, it starts to build consistency. Children begin to recognize the same phrases, the same tone, the same expectations wherever they go. That predictability helps them feel safe, and safety is what allows regulation to happen. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as using quick check-ins in the morning, asking what zone a child might be in before a big activity, or taking a short moment to reflect at the end of the day. These small, repeated moments add up. They remind children that emotions are normal and that they can manage them with the right support. What I've seen in schools that do this really well is that it becomes part of the culture. It's not a separate strategy or a behaviour plan. It's just the way adults and children talk to each other. When that happens, behaviour starts to feel less reactive and more relational. The most powerful part of this is that it builds trust. Children begin to believe that adults will respond to them with understanding rather than punishment. And once that trust is there, emotional learning starts to happen naturally. So as we wrap this up, the key idea is that embedding the zones of regulation isn't just about teaching emotions. It's about building a consistent environment where everyone is using the same language, the same tone, and the same calm approach. That's what creates a real culture of regulation. So to finish up, this really comes down to how we think about behaviour. When we start seeing it as communication, everything changes. It stops being about reacting to what we see and becomes about understanding what is happening underneath. When adults use consistent language and respond with calmness and curiosity, children begin to feel understood. They stop seeing emotions as something they will get in trouble for and start to see them as information that helps them understand themselves. Every time a child recognizes how they feel, names their zone, or uses a strategy to calm themselves, that is real learning. Those small moments build emotional intelligence, and over time they start to shape the whole classroom. The zones of regulation is not about being perfect, it is about consistency. The more we use the language and model it, the more it becomes a natural part of how we support children every day. That is where the real impact happens. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me.